need to be more resilient, more nimble, if we want to survive as a species. And I think there's no stage bigger than the Bay Delta to help us articulate what's going to make us more nimble.
The Bay Delta, the Bay Delta.
What's going to make this planet still habitable by human beings.
The good news is there are many solutions for what we need to be doing. We can build a portfolio for the 21st century that includes large amounts of high-quality treated wastewater that we used to throw away, but that ought to be considered an asset now, not a liability. We can capture more stormwater that we now lose to the oceans during wet periods, and we can use it to recharge our overtapped aquifers.
Raleigh's population's grown by over 1 million people in the last couple decades, and its water use overall has remained flat due to improvements in water use efficiency.
Figuring out how to manage the power dynamics, the political dynamics, is a much more difficult challenge for California than new technology or building desalination plants or figuring out how to grow crops differently. The politics is really going to determine much of California's water future.
Groups like the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California and the Westlands Water District in the San Joaquin Valley want to maximize use of water from the Delta for their own interests, namely sending water down south.
Every interest group wants the Delta managed for their interest.
These same organizations also reject the scientific consensus that there isn't enough water flowing through the Delta to support native ecosystems, despite species being on the brink of extinction.
We also believe, though, that there is sufficient water in the system for the environment and for native fish.
Therefore, restoring any semblance of the Delta's native environment has been incredibly challenging.
We have this diversity in ecosystem types in California, and we just can't support that anymore the way that we're managing it. So that, the bigger picture is, are we okay with that as a society?
I think if you polled Californians, 95% of them say we would like to have rivers with some fish in them in the future. Now, how you get there is the difficult part. But first you have to understand that we may not have rivers. And we may not have fish, so do you want to do something?
Warping out, Captain. Warping out.
And so California's water issues are really just a microcosm for what we're seeing around the planet and what we're able to monitor with satellite data. For instance, on the India-Pakistan border here, the Indus River Basin is a heavily stressed aquifer, and this region of the country gets groundwater pumped substantially. So, a shared resource by two countries that needs to be well managed in order to avoid political tensions. So as population keeps growing,
either I saw something fall down that was like a dust bunny thing, or I saw a ferret go by
at some point in the future. And so the realization of that has not really hit everyone yet. I fully think.
And not a ferret.
Where does the water come from?
I said it was probably a ghost baby too. It wasn't no night baby.
No matter where you live in the world. And with that knowledge, there will be a trickle-down effect, I think, that affects policy and therefore affects management. If we can't deal with our water issues in a place like California, how can we expect to deal with our water issues in other places of the world? I mean, in California, we have everything we need to be successful. It's just about making the decision to do so, and that really means prioritizing and thinking about the future.
And so in California, these issues are wrestled with before the State Water Resources Control Board in the hopes of creating a sustainable water future.
Our analysis today shows there's no evidence that flows less than 50% airflow, which we've seen a huge decline in the Delta ecosystem, and these water quality standards that are supposed to prevent a decline like that from happening have not been updated in now 25 years.
The State Water Board did a very comprehensive analysis of what it would take to restore healthy fish populations, and basically concluded that right now we divert about half of the fresh water out of the Delta ecosystem, and that to be healthy, we needed to restore about 75% flows.
The conflict is
intense as people see everything as a loss, either because they're worrying about fish and wildlife on the brink of extinction, or you're a farmer or a community leader who's worried about the livelihood of your family or your people.
We've tested the hypothesis that insufficient flow, despite the evidence, will work. It hasn't. We've tested the hypothesis that doing more habitat without sufficient flow regimes will work. It hasn't. Why don't we try testing the hypothesis that the amount of flow that the scientific evidence and your record suggests will work?
But the Water Quality Control Plan, because it's a plan under some laws created by this bureaucracy over many, many years, it doesn't get nearly the attention of giant tunnels that you could like roll a small aircraft through. The Water Quality Control Plan will really define water quality conditions that support clean water and fisheries and can potentially save endangered species for decades to come.
There's a story I'm sure many people are familiar with called The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. The boy plays in the tree and eats its apples as a child, and the tree's very happy. The boy sells the apples when he's a teen to make a little bit of money, and the tree's very happy. He harvests the branches to build a house as a young man, and he cuts down the trunk in middle age to create a canoe. And the tree's always happy to be there for him. And finally, as an old man, he uses the stump of the tree to sit and think. And the story is very divisive. Some people